No hospitals, no antibiotics, no machines. Yet millions survived devastating illnesses across centuries. How? The answer lies not in luck, but in forgotten systems of care, ancient knowledge passed through generations, and truths about healing that modern medicine has overlooked. What did they know? Imagine a small village at the edge of a forest, sometime in the depths of what we now call the medieval period. The air is cold, heavy with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. Inside a low-roof dwelling, a young woman lies on a bed of straw, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. A fever has taken hold. Her forehead burns to the touch. Her mother sits beside her, pressing cloth soaked in cool water against her face, whispering words that are half prayer, half instruction. Outside, the village continues its work. Animals must be fed. Bread must be baked. Life cannot stop for sickness. But everyone knows, everyone watches the door of that small house with a mixture of fear and hope. They have seen this before. Some who fall ill rise again. Others do not. There is no physician within 100 miles, no sterile instruments, no understanding of bacteria or viruses, no pills, no injections, no machines that measure and monitor the body's hidden processes. There is only this, a dark room, a mother's hands, generations of accumulated knowledge passed down in whispers and demonstrated actions. And yet, against every expectation of our modern minds, the young woman will survive. In 3 weeks, she will walk again. In 6, she will return to her work in the fields. Her body will bear no visible trace of the battle it fought. This is the paradox that confronts us when we look honestly at the past. We have been taught to believe that medicine before the modern era was primitive, ineffective, little more than superstition dressed in the language of healing. We imagine our ancestors as helpless victims of every passing illness, dying in vast numbers from conditions we would now treat with a simple course of medication. And while it is true that mortality rates were higher, that epidemics swept through populations with devastating force, that infections we consider trivial could prove fatal, it is also true that millions upon millions of people recovered from serious illnesses without any of the tools we consider essential today. How did they do it? This question deserves more than a dismissive answer. It deserves the same careful analysis we would give to any historical problem, because the answer reveals something profound not only about the past, but about the nature of healing itself. The first thing we must understand is that recovery from illness is not primarily a medical achievement. It is a biological one. The human body possesses remarkable capacities for self-repair, capacities that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in environments far more hostile than anything most modern people will ever experience. Our immune systems can identify and destroy invading pathogens. Our tissues can regenerate. Our organs can compensate for damage and restore function. This is not mysticism. This is the fundamental reality of human physiology. Medicine, in its truest sense, does not heal. It supports the conditions under which the body heals itself. Our ancestors understood this, even if they could not articulate it in the language of cellular biology. They observed that rest was essential, that a person fighting illness needed to be freed from labor, kept warm, allowed to sleep. They observed that certain foods seemed to aid recovery, while others made symptoms worse. They observed that isolation could prevent the spread of sickness through a community. These were not random guesses. They were the products of countless generations of careful observation, trial and error, accumulated wisdom encoded in cultural practice and oral tradition. Consider the role of the healer in ancient societies. This figure appears in virtually every culture we have studied, from the shamans of nomadic tribes to the temple physicians of early urban civilizations. These individuals were not charlatans, despite what later centuries of Enlightenment thinking sometimes suggested. They were specialists, trained through years of apprenticeship, holders of knowledge that their communities considered precious and powerful. They knew which plants reduced fever, which roots eased pain, which preparations could induce sleep or stimulate appetite. They understood the importance of cleaning wounds, of setting broken bones, of draining infected tissue. Skeletal remains from archaeological sites across the world tell us something remarkable about ancient medical practice. We find skulls that show evidence of trepanation, the careful drilling of holes into the cranium, with bone regrowth around the edges, indicating that the patient survived the procedure for years afterward. We find limbs that were clearly broken and then properly set, healing in correct alignment. We find evidence of healed infections, survived injuries, recovered illnesses written in the very bones of people who lived thousands of years before anything we would recognize as modern medicine. The written record, where it exists, provides even more detail. Ancient medical texts from various civilizations describe surgical procedures of remarkable sophistication. They catalog hundreds of medicinal plants and specify precise dosages. They discuss diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment in systematic terms. They distinguish between conditions that could be treated and those that should be allowed to run their course. This was not blind fumbling in the dark. This was organized knowledge, constantly refined through practice and observation. But medicine was only part of the system that allowed people to recover from illness. Equally important was the social structure that surrounded the sick. In traditional societies, illness was a community concern, not a private problem. When someone fell ill, the community mobilized. Family members took over their work obligations. Neighbors brought food. Children were cared for by extended networks of relatives. The sick person was never alone, never abandoned to their suffering. This might seem like simple kindness, and indeed it was, but it was also profoundly effective medicine. The stress of isolation, of worry about obligations unfulfilled and dependence uncared for, suppresses immune function and slows recovery. Our ancestors, without knowing the mechanisms, created social systems that eliminated these barriers to healing. The psychological dimension of recovery was also well understood, though expressed in different terms. Healers in many cultures employed ritual, prayer, symbolic actions, and narrative to provide the sick with a framework for understanding their suffering. They were not merely ill, they were engaged in a meaningful struggle. There were forces aligned on their behalf. There was hope, expressed in the confident actions of the healer, the presence of family, the rituals performed to invoke protection and cure. Modern research has demonstrated conclusively that expectation, belief, and social support measurably influence physical healing. Our ancestors built entire systems around this truth. We must also consider the environment in which recovery took place. Traditional dwellings were not the damp, disease-ridden hovels of popular imagination. They were often well designed for their climate, providing adequate ventilation in summer and effective heat retention in winter. Food, while sometimes scarce, was unprocessed and nutritionally dense when available. Water sources were often protected and kept clean by cultural taboos that, whatever their stated rationale, had practical sanitary effects. Physical activity was built into daily life, creating populations that were, on average, more robust and resilient than their modern counterparts. This is not to romanticize the past. Life was hard. Many people died young. Epidemics could devastate entire regions. Chronic malnutrition was a constant threat in many societies. Injuries and infections that are trivially treatable today were often fatal. But acknowledging these realities does not require us to deny the corresponding truth, that human beings also recovered from serious illness, often and reliably, using systems of care and knowledge that we have largely forgotten. There is a temptation to attribute ancient survival to some kind of constitutional toughness, to imagine that past generations were simply more robust than we are, their bodies hardened by harsh conditions. This explanation is both condescending and wrong. It dismisses the genuine knowledge and systematic care that facilitated recovery, attributing everything to genetic fortune rather than human skill. The truth is both more interesting and more humbling. Our ancestors were as vulnerable to illness as we are. Their bodies functioned according to the same principles. What differed was not their biology, but their systems of response. Those systems developed over vast spans of time through processes that resembled natural selection applied to cultural practices. Communities that developed effective methods of caring for the sick thrived. Those that did not faded. The knowledge that survived was, in a very real sense, tested by countless cases, refined by endless observation, filtered through generations of practice. By the time it reached any given healer in any given village, it represented the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years. The transmission of this knowledge was itself a sophisticated process. Healers chose apprentices carefully and trained them over many years. The training was not merely intellectual but practical, requiring the apprentice to observe, assist, and eventually perform treatments under supervision. Mistakes were corrected. Successful techniques were reinforced. By the time a healer practiced independently, they carried within them the experience of a long lineage, each generation adding observations and refinements to the inherited body of knowledge. We can trace some of this knowledge forward into later periods and see its remarkable durability. Herbal remedies that appear in ancient texts remained in use for centuries, even millennia, precisely because they worked. When they were eventually subjected to modern analysis, many were found to contain compounds with genuine physiological effects. The willow bark that ancient healers used to reduce fever contains the precursor to one of our most common modern medications. The mold that sometimes grew on bread and was applied to infected wounds contained substances we would later rediscover and call something else entirely. Our ancestors did not know why these remedies worked, but they knew that they did, and that knowing was sufficient. The philosophical implications of this history are worth considering carefully. We live in an age of unprecedented medical capability. We have tools that would seem miraculous to every previous generation. We can see inside the living body. We can destroy invading organisms with targeted precision. We can replace failing organs with transplants from donors or machines built in laboratories. And yet, for all this capability, we have lost something as well. We have lost the understanding that healing is not something done to us by experts and technologies, but something our own bodies do, given the right conditions. We have outsourced our faith in recovery to institutions and professionals, forgetting that the fundamental capacity for healing lies within. This is not an argument against modern medicine. The lives saved, the suffering prevented, the diseases conquered are beyond calculation. But it is an argument for humility, for recognition that the healers of the past were not fools stumbling in ignorance, but practitioners of a different system, one adapted to their circumstances and often remarkably effective within those constraints. When we ask how people in the past recovered from illness, we are really asking about the nature of human resilience. We are asking what resources, beyond pills and procedures, human beings bring to the encounter with disease and injury. We are asking whether there is wisdom encoded in practices we have abandoned, lessons we might yet relearn. The young woman in that medieval village, rising from her sickbed to walk again in the spring sunlight, knew nothing of immunology or pharmacology, but she knew the hands that tended her, the herbs that eased her fever, the prayers that gave meaning to her suffering, and the community that carried her obligations until she could carry them again. That knowledge was not inferior. It was different. And in that difference lies a challenge to everything we think we understand about medicine, recovery, and the stubborn, remarkable resilience of the human body and the human spirit.